Hi guys, I'm Janae Brazil and today we are here for another week of driver ratings for the British Grand Prix. I must say I have very mixed feelings about the outcome of this race, especially the Grand Prix, but we won't waste any more time because we have a lot to talk about. We had a busy sprint and a very busy Grand Prix at the end, so we have a whole lot to talk about. So we will start with Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso, who I am giving a 5 out of 10. Again, another week where rating the Astons is very difficult because the car is shit. For lack of a better term, it is not good. The onboards I saw today of Alonso and Stroll were comical. The steering is so horrific. I cannot believe that they have to drive this thing. I'm sure they cannot wait for their upgrades in Hungary, and I really do hope for their sakes that they improve the car somewhat, because this is getting ridiculous now, and it is just, once again, I can't really rate Fernando because it's just like the car is bad. And so similarly, we will move on to Lance Stroll, who I'm also giving a 5 out of 10. For all the same reasons. The car is bad. Him and Alonso are just kind of bumbling around together at the back of the grid. It's not good. The qualifying pace of the car especially is horrifically bad. To be a full second off the next worst team is horrific for Aston Martin, truly. One thing I will say about Lance Stroll though is I saw the onboards from the sprint of his very interesting steering technique. I don't quite know what the fuck he was doing, but it was entertaining. We'll give him that. So yeah, just another 5 for Stroll. The Aston Martin is so difficult to really say anything about, and the drivers are certainly hindered by it. So I just don't have much to say. Next up we have Cadillac, and we're going to start with Valtteri Bottas, who I'm also giving a 5 out of 10. One positive for Valtteri this weekend was out qualifying Perez in main qualifying. That feels more like what I was expecting from Bottas this season, because I do think he's really great over one lap, especially at Silverstone, it must be said. So I actually think that was a pretty good qualifying from him, and then yeah, again, it's kind of stuck with the pace of the car, but after hearing from Perez and Bottas after the race, they do sound more positive about driving it, which is good to see. So hopefully they are moving in a more positive direction, but as of right now, it's still very difficult to rate them. So it is a 5 out of 10 for Valtteri Bottas. Next up we have Sergio Perez, who I'm also giving a 5 out of 10. I promise we will get to some different grades soon, but it was, again, it's fine. Like, his race pace was better than Valtteri, I will say that, but his qualifying was pretty on par. Obviously he was behind Bottas in main qualifying, ahead of him in the sprint though, but then his pace in the sprint was awful, or something went wrong, I'm not sure, because he finished at the very back there. But in the main race, finished 14th, obviously flattered by all of the things that happened ahead that we will talk about, but overall not too bad from Perez, I think, considering the state of the car, but obviously very difficult to rate, and so for that reason is also a 5. Next up we have Williams, and I'm going to start with Carlos Sainz, who I'm also giving a 5 out of 10. I promise this is the last 5 for a while. Really pretty rough weekend for both Williams drivers, but Carlos was just the slightly better of the two. That's really all I have to say about it. The car was not good. Apparently they brought upgrades and they just haven't worked, so that is bad news for the team, certainly, which sucks because I really do like this team and they have really great drivers, but it just feels like they are so hindered by the car. So yeah, it is a 5 for Carlos Sainz. And then Alex Albon, I am giving a 4.5 because really it's just the difference in qualifying pace to his teammate is too much for me to give him the same grade, and even though like a 4.5 feels harsh, because he also got very unlucky this weekend, I can't justify raising Sainz to 5.5 to give him the half a point over Alex, so I have to just lower Alex Albon to a 4.5. Yeah, DNF'd in the main race because of problems. Also, he did steamroll into Ollie Behrman, so that was not good. And yeah, just not great. And especially the big concern for me with Alex Albon is the qualifying gap to Carlos Sainz. To be a full half a second down is really concerning. So I actually don't think the 4.5 is that harsh. Next up we have Alpine. I'm going to start with Franco Colapinto, who I gave a 7.5 out of 10. I think this was a good weekend for Franco, except for main qualifying, but he did make that up in the race. Even though obviously things ahead did cause him to gain a couple of positions, he still gained a lot on the road and a lot in strategy, so I think it was a good solid drive from Franco. I think he can be happy with that one. And yeah, I think once again I think there's just good solid driving coming from Franco Colapinto more consistently now, especially compared to last season. So overall I think this was a positive weekend. Then we've got Pierre Gasly, who I'm giving an 8 out of 10. Once again, Pierre Gasly shows up, does I think the best that the car can do, or even a little more, and you know, takes home some points. You know, got lucky obviously with what happened ahead, but also like he would have finished ahead of Franco if it wasn't for a bad pit stop, which isn't his fault. So yeah, I think it was another really good solid weekend from Gasly. Good qualifying laps, I think, especially because the Alpine just didn't seem to be quite on pace this weekend. Silverstone, I think, was a track that really highlighted some different weaknesses for teams, and I just think the Alpine was just wasn't quite there, but I think Gasly did the most he could with it, so I think an 8 out of 10 is fair. Next up we have Audi. I'm going to start with Nico Hülkenberg. I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. I have written down 6.5, but looking at this, I mean, he just was not really on Bortoletto's pace at all this weekend. Not horrifically off, like he's only a place or two behind. You know, got unlucky in the race and had to DNF, which is unfortunate. But yeah, even when he was in the car, just the pace wasn't quite there, and that's unfortunate. Bortoletto just had the measure of him this week, I think, so I think a 6 is pretty fair. And then next up we have Gabriel Bortoletto, who I'm giving a 7 out of 10. I think this was a good weekend from Gabby. I do think he obviously is flattered by the things that happened ahead, but ultimately you have to finish the race to gain from other people's misfortune, and he did that. Takes home some more points for Audi, which was very good. And yeah, I think overall, like, he was maximising the car all weekend, so even actually, as I say that, maybe that is a little harsh of me to give this 7. Maybe it is a 7.5 for Gabby, but overall a good weekend. I think he should be really happy with that. Next up we have the V-Carbs. I'm going to start with Liam Lawson, who I'm giving an 8.5 out of 10. This is really just a weekly occurrence now of Liam Lawson putting together good, solid races, getting the maximum out of what is a really good midfield car. The V-Carb is clearly now a step ahead of the rest of the midfield, and this was just another week where Liam really maximised that. Obviously qualified behind Lindblad in the main race. That was his only real moment of weakness all weekend. Other than that, just really good, solid driving, and really benefits from what happened ahead. And I think that's deserved. I think finishing 6th, he'll be very happy with that, as he should be. And I actually, yeah, at this point you can pretty clearly say that Liam Lawson just is the best of the midfield drivers now. He is very consistent, very solid, and I think it's very good to see. Next up we have Arvid Lindblad, who I'm giving an 8 out of 10. Very similar to Liam, a really good solid weekend. Got, I think, the most out of the Racing Bull's car. Yeah, obviously they have a really good car to work with, and both drivers are doing so. And yeah, I think Lawson was just a little better, which is why Lindblad gets half a point less, but still really good driving from Arvid. I think he should be happy with that. Next up we have Haas. I'm going to start with Esteban Ocon, who I'm giving a 5 out of 10. Yeah, very average again for Esteban, which I hate to say. I hate feeling like I'm showing up every week and having to speak badly about Esteban Ocon, because I really do like him, but it's just not, it's not coming together. I do think this was a slightly tidier weekend, which is good, and he wasn't as far off, which I think, you know, he'll take that as a positive, but yeah, it still isn't great. Also really difficult, I think, to grade the Haas cars, because the pace is just fallen off and it feels like such a different car to what we had at the beginning of the season. But yeah, it's a 5. And then we've got Ollie Behrman, who I'm going to give a 6 out of 10. I actually think Ollie, especially in qualifying, really outdid the car, especially in main qualifying. Sprint quali was fine, but in main qualifying, I think to get that car somehow up to 14th is very impressive, considering the state of it. It's just not good, but he definitely managed it. And then up to 12th, obviously unfortunate to get taken out by Albon early on. He probably could have had a shot at points with everything that went on if that hadn't have happened, so that's very unfortunate for him. But still, I think a good solid weekend. It feels difficult to rate, and in some ways a 6 feels harsh, but it's just so hard to tell with where the Haas car is, like what a fair rating should be. So there might even be a world in which I do up this to a 6.5. Next up we have Red Bull. I'm just going to even before I start talking about Isaac or Max, just going to say that, like, I'm probably going to have controversial takes here. We're going to start anyway. So Isaac Hadjar, I'm giving a 7 out of 10. I think this was a good, solid drive from Isaac. My main criticism for Isaac for the main race is that despite all that went on ahead of him with Max and Kimi, he did not gain any positions. Like, he finished where he started, which does feel like a bit of a waste. I do think he should have gained positions from the misfortune of others up ahead, and he's kind of one of the only drivers that didn't. And I do think that is a mark against him. Obviously, he qualified ahead of Max, but I'm going to be talking about that when we get to Max. And the sprint, he was fine. Obviously, the start, again, for the Red Bulls is not good. It's really, I think, hard for me to grade the Red Bulls at this point. One, because I am ultimately a Red Bull fan, and more specifically a Max fan, so I do find rating these harder because I have my opinion, and while these are subjective, I don't want to like say complete bullshit just because I like my driver, but also because the Red Bull has got such a random series of problems occurring. It feels like I never really know if they've had a clean session or not, and so like Hadjar losing and not getting any points in the sprint is really, you know, more I think a fault of the Red Bull car just being awful off the start once again. But then again, yeah, my main criticism is just the race. I think he should have gained something really from what went on. So even though like 5th position isn't bad, especially considering the state of the car, I just feel like he should have gained when other people that started behind him have really gained from this. And next up is Max Verstappen. This is going to be the part where I think I annoy people with what I have to say. I've written down, I'm giving Max an 8 out of 10. There is a world in which I do up this to an 8.5 depending on how I'm feeling editing this. We'll start with the sprint. I think sprint qualifying was very good from Max, obviously put it 3rd. I do know all the drivers from like 3rd to 8th did, you know, qualify very closely together, and Max just happened to be at the front end of that, but ultimately that is based in skill that he was at the front of that very close pack. Obviously lost positions in the sprint, but I think finishing 6th is where I expected the car to be, so I'm not shocked by that at all. And ultimately, yeah, he still took home points in the sprint, which is kind of all we can ask from the Red Bull at this point. Now to the main race. We're going to start with qualifying, where I'm sorry, but everyone trying to act like Max was worse in qualifying than Hadjar. I'm missing the point for the fact that he had no top speed and had deployment problems and was still complaining about the balance of the car. Once again, I swear it's every weekend now. and he was still only a 10th off of his teammate despite all of those issues, I think is far better than people want to give credit for. I do think the main unfortunate thing for Max with being as successful as he has been and having as many incredible races that we all know is that when he has an average or difficult time, it's really criticised far more than it would be from anyone else bar, I think, probably like Lewis. And while obviously I'm sure someone's going to think I'm like glazing Max or whatever, and maybe I am a little bit because ultimately he is the driver I support, but I just, this conversation about qualifying is just so frustrating to me when like he doesn't have top speed in the straights and he's only a 10th behind his teammate. I think the qualifying result flatters Hadjar a little bit because Norris managed to slot between them, but really it's very little difference and Max's car was not working at its full capacity. Then in the main race, I actually think Max drove a phenomenal race for a lot of the Grand Prix, especially considering he was still having issues with the car. He was complaining about the downshifts on like lap 12 or something. It was so constantly difficult for him. The hard tyres did not work on either Red Bull, it must be said. And Max still was able to hold up Lewis and George for a good while, put up a good fight. I also think the Red Bull strategy, the pitting him super early, I think was effective, but I also think risky, and I do think getting a VSC helped him out there, I will say that. But I actually do think this is probably one of Max's better races around Silverstone, and maybe people would have given more credit to that if he had managed to finish the race and come third, but obviously he DNF'd because once again the rear wing malfunctioned just like in Austria. And apart from my frustration with obviously this meaning he was out of the race, my bigger criticism now is the safety issue of the rear wing having problems like this, heading into high speed corners at the end of like deployment zones. This is becoming a real issue now. I think Max is well within his rights to be as angry as he was and also as concerned as he sounds now about the safety of that car. He's been, I think, very lucky that both of these incidents have been at tracks with him with massive gravel traps and a long way to a wall. Because if this happens, I'm thinking about Spa next time out. Like if this happens at Spa, it terrifies me to think about. We really, or a street circuit. Like if this happens in the high speed of a street circuit or just any track where the walls are closer, this could be a far worse incident. And I really feel like Red Bull need to solve this, not just for Max's race, but also for the safety of the Red Bull car. So I am very angry about this, it must be said, as you can tell. And I think it's unfortunate because I do think Max was ultimately putting together a really good race. I think it was really good drive from him despite several issues. And as much as he wants to be in the media saying he doesn't think they deserve third on merit and that if he got on the podium and finished he wouldn't have felt justified. No, I don't think it would have been justified for the car, but I do think it would have been justified for the drive. And so that is why I've rated him an 8 out of 10. I'm probably going to leave it as an 8. I think an 8.5 is pushing it, but just know I've considered it. Next up we have McLaren. I'm going to start with Oscar Piastri, who just was really the unluckiest all weekend. Actually, no, that's a lie. Max and Kimi were definitely more unlucky, but Oscar had a rough time of it in the sprint. Just unfortunate that again he was in that pack that all qualified really close together, but he was towards the tail end of it and there's not a lot he could have done. And also I do think the McLaren pace was a little off, certainly off the Mercedes and the Ferrari, but I even think it wasn't great in comparison to the Red Bull either, so it's not ideal. And I do think Oscar was just kind of hindered by the car there. And then in the Grand Prix, really unfortunate to just get sandwiched by the Racing Bulls and take out his front wing, and really that ended Oscar's race before it began. I think there was a pretty decent recovery drive in there considering, yeah, it's unfortunate because I don't think Oscar had like a bad weekend driving, but there's really nothing to show for it. But ultimately, I think a 7 out of 10 is the best I can give, considering, because it is just hard to know how he would have been if he was in the front pack where he should have been. And next up we have Lando Norris. I'm going to give an 8 out of 10. First of all, really great job in the sprint, getting up into third. Yeah, I think obviously benefited from George, Charles and Max deciding to fuck around and fight each other for essentially the whole sprint. That certainly bought him time, but ultimately you have to be in the right place to benefit, so he did that. And then again in the main race, really benefited from what happened up ahead and kept it tidy. The pace of the McLaren wasn't great, so I think Lando put together a pretty good drive considering all of that. Next up is Ferrari, and I'm going to start with Lewis Hamilton. I'm going to give a 9 out of 10. I was considering a 9.5, that's why I wrote down, but then I just remembered he did get himself a 5-second penalty. Even though obviously it was such a small movement and like it didn't actually gain him anything, it did restop. Ultimately, if you make a mistake like that on the start, you get a penalty. It is the rules, unfortunately. But yeah, other than that, I think a really good weekend from Lewis. Obviously, sprint pole, second in the sprint, and I think that was, yeah, really well maximised. Obviously, he just couldn't really defend from Kimi much more than he did. The deployment on the Mercedes is absolutely ridiculous. And then in the main race, obviously we talked about the jump start situation. But aside from that, I think it was a good race. He would have been second if it wasn't for, pissing under the safety car, but I don't blame Ferrari for making that choice because I also thought they would have gotten a final lap of racing, and in that case I think it was the right decision. Unfortunately, the safety car had to stay out the last lap, and so Lewis didn't get the opportunity there, but I think it is still fine and a good drive from Lewis Hamilton ultimately. And then next up we have Charles Leclerc. I must say, for all of the Verstappen Leclerc fans, we really can never be happy about two things at once, but my God, am I thrilled for Charles Leclerc to have won this race. Now obviously we're going to talk about Kimi Antonelli and his gaining on Charles soon, but ultimately Charles Leclerc did his job this weekend, which was maximise the car and then some, I think. We'll start with the sprint. Qualified 4th. It's not the worst. I do think he probably should have qualified ahead of Max in the sprint, but it's fine. And then finished the sprint in 5th. Again, not awful. And I did expect him to be behind George, so the real kind of surprise in the sprint was Lando. And he could have, again, not fought with George and Max, but he did, and I don't hate that he did it. I think that's in Charles Leclerc's nature, really, to fight, especially I think with those two. So I don't really have anything bad to say about the sprint, but that ultimately is what knocks him to a 9.5 down from a 10, because I do think in the main race he did everything right, got Antonelli on the start, built a good gap, had good pace. I do think he would have been under serious threat if Kimi had not had problems, and he probably would have finished second in that case, but even then I probably still would have graded him very highly, because this was a very good drive from Charles Leclerc, and ultimately I'm very happy that luck was in his favour today, because this is a track he has been historically unlucky at, and I'm very happy for him that for once it feels like he's gotten lucky, and that also this weekend was a really good return to form for Charles after a few difficult weeks. I think people really questioning his skill as a driver. I never really wanted to buy into that, because I do think he is still very talented, very good, and this was just a difficult spot for a few weeks, and it happens to every driver, but I think this was a great comeback for Charles and I'm thrilled with it, honestly. And then finally we have Mercedes. I'm going to start with Kimi Antonelli, who I am giving a 10 out of 10, because Kimi this weekend, despite obviously finishing 15th in the Grand Prix, I think this, more than any other race I've seen from him, is is a real defining drive for Kimi Antonelli and the type of driver he is. We're going to start with the sprint. Obviously, didn't get sprint pole, but was second. I think Lewis just put in a phenomenal lap for sprint pole, so I'm not going to downgrade Kimi for that. And then, of course, he won the sprint anyway. He just has great pace in that car and knows how to use it, and that was abundantly clear in the sprint once again. And then in the main race, I do think he would have taken this win from Charles Leclerc. It's just so unlucky for Kimi to, of course, this late in the race have the problem with the wheel shield, and that ultimately destroyed his chances at points, at anything. It's a really unfortunate, points lost in the title, especially. Lewis Hamilton's now 30 points away, and I'm sure that is a terrifying prospect for Kimi Antonelli. But yeah, on pace, Kimi was phenomenal. He was easily the fastest driver on track. His time management as well as keeping that pace is phenomenal. And really, for me, him at least trying to keep going even with the problems, just to try and get a point even, was very admirable. I think it says a lot about the type of driver Kimi Antonelli is, and I think this, despite obviously being a really unfortunate situation, was a defining one for Kimi in a more positive sense. And I think this is what you want to see from someone fighting for the title, is that he was not willing to give this up without a fight. Yeah, I think this was a very, very good weekend from him, but just had an unlucky ending. And finally, we have George Russell. I'm giving a 7.5 out of 10. Now, I already know some people are going to be like, what do you mean you gave George less than Max and Lando? I think Max and Lando drove better than George Russell this weekend, so he gets half a point less than them. But main criticisms for George, first of all, the sprint. To qualify 5th in the Mercedes is not good at all. He got very lucky, I think, that both Max and Charles had horrific starts in the sprint, so he was able to gain from that. But even then, to not be able to hunt down Lando, to get caught up in the fight with Max and Charles, is not great, because I think his car is good enough, especially to be stuck around Max at all on track, when Max's car was having problems, and even at its best, I don't think that car is on pace with the Mercedes, especially not around Silverstone. We could make an argument for it in Austria that Max had better pace than George, but that was just not true around the circuit this weekend. And then in the main race, again, qualified in 4th, I don't think he should have qualified behind both Ferraris. I think he at the very least should have split them. And then, finishing second really, I think, flatters George's drive, despite obviously his bad luck with the slow puncture and all of those things. He did get unlucky in this race, I will say that too. But for me, the big issue is the race pace. Once again, his race pace is just not good. It feels like it's so slow. I don't know what's happening with George in that car. Now, if there are actually problems as he's claiming, then I would give consideration to that, because I've given Max that same consideration. But if there aren't, I really don't understand what is happening with George Russell on race pace. Yeah, it's a weird one for George Russell. Maybe there is a world in which I up this to an 8 out of 10. I'll see how I'm feeling again when I'm editing. But it's difficult because it feels like in comparison to Kimi, he's just nowhere near. And ultimately, I mainly do grade these based on comparison to their teammate. And next to Kimi, it just feels like George is nowhere near him. And all of his experience is just not really doing it. He looks uncomfortable. Of course, he also nearly took himself out of Q1, although I do think that was something weird with the car, because I'm not convinced that George doesn't know how to drive that corner. But yeah, it's a difficult one, but ultimately my main thing, once again, just George Russell's race pace isn't great. And it also, watching him wheel to wheel with Max and Lewis, I think really highlights a lot of the shortcomings of George Russell's driving. It feels like every time he's wheel to wheel with Max or Lewis or Charles especially, it really highlights his weaknesses. And the more time he spends amongst that pack, I think the harder I find it to be convinced that he's really good wheel to wheel. But yeah, that is all. I feel like I was quite fired up during a lot of these racings. I've been fired up since 4 AM when I had to watch Max's car careen into the gravel for the second weekend in a row. But yeah, obviously this was a complicated weekend to rate, I will say that much. So let me know if you agree or disagree with me at all in the comments, because a weekend like this, it feels difficult to keep track of everything between the qualifying sessions and the sprint and the main race. So if you have any opinions, let me know. But yeah, other than that, just a difficult one for me to rate. I'm quite glad we now have a weekend off before Spa. I'm not super excited either to see what these cars are like around Spa. I love that track so much, but I do feel like it's going to be another deployment problem track. But yeah, that is all I have to say about this race weekend. If you liked this video, please hit the like button, and if you would like to see even more from me, please subscribe. And if you would like to see even more from me, you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Letterboxd, all those things are linked down below, where you can see my makeup and special effects work, as well as whatever else I've been up to lately, and movies I've watched, and all of those things, which also is included on this channel as well. You can see my movie commentary and other videos. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.